It was one of those slow Tuesday afternoons, the kind where time seems to stretch like taffy, and even the sun looks a little tired. Inside a McDonald's near downtown Los Angeles, the air hummed with the usual lunchtime rhythm, kids laughing over Happy Meals, tired parents scrolling on their phones, the occasional beep of the ice cream machine, nothing out of the ordinary. Just another day in a city that never really sleeps, but sometimes, just for a moment, catches its breath. In a corner booth sat a small boy, no older than 5, hunched over a half-eaten cheeseburger. His sneakers barely touched the floor, and his fingers were sticky with ketchup. Next to him, his mother sipped a lukewarm coffee, her eyes heavy but alert. They'd just come from a doctor's appointment, routine checkup, nothing serious. But the morning had been long and she was running on fumes. Still, she kept one hand resting lightly on the table, close enough to reach him if he needed her. The boy wasn't usually this quiet. At home, he chattered nonstop, about clouds shaped like dragons, about how his stuffed rabbit could talk if you listened really hard, about why the moon followed him in the car. But today, something sat differently in his chest. Maybe it was the way the man had raised his voice last night. Maybe it was the locked door he wasn't supposed to open. Or maybe it was just that sometimes even little hearts carry things too big for their size. He glanced around the restaurant, eyes landing on the door as it swung open. A man walked in, tall, wearing a faded baseball cap pulled low, jeans and a plain black t-shirt. He moved without fanfare, like he was trying not to be noticed, but a few heads turned anyway. Someone whispered to their friend. A teenager pulled out their phone, then put it away, respecting the unspoken rule. Let him be. The boy didn't recognize the name. He didn't know about movies or fame or red carpets. But something about the man, the way he held himself calm and steady like a tree in a storm, made the boy sit up straighter. Without thinking, he slid out of the booth. "Hey, where are you going?" His mother asked, voice soft but firm. He didn't answer, just walked, small steps but sure, across the tiled floor, past the soda machine and the trash bins, until he stood right in front of the man who was waiting in line for coffee. The man turned, sensing someone near. When he saw the boy looking up at him, big eyes, messy hair, a crumpled napkin still tucked in his shirt collar, he smiled. Not the kind of smile people give for cameras, but the real kind, the kind that starts in the eyes. "Hey there," he said, crouching down so they were eye level. The boy didn't say anything at first, just studied him, as if deciding whether this was safe. Then in a voice so quiet it barely stirred the air, he leaned in and whispered 4 words. What he said wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic, but it hit like a stone dropped in still water. The man's face changed instantly. All the color drained from his cheeks. His shoulders tensed. For a split second, he looked like someone who just remembered something terrible or realized something urgent. He glanced past the boy toward the corner booth, where the mother now stood, eyes wide with confusion and worry. Then, without hesitation, he stood, pulled out his phone, and dialed 911. His voice was low but clear as he spoke to the dispatcher. "Hi, yeah, I'm at the McDonald's on 7th and Olive. There's a child here. I think he's in danger." He gave their exact location, described the boy and his mother, and repeated the whispered words as accurately as he could. No exaggeration, no panic. Just facts delivered with a calm urgency that made the operator take immediate note. All the while, he kept one hand gently on the boy's shoulder, anchoring him. The boy didn't cry, didn't pull away. He just stood there, quiet again, as if he'd done what he needed to do. The mother rushed over, heart pounding. "What's going on?" "What did he say?" The man met her eyes. He said something that sounded like he's scared at home. He didn't accuse, didn't assume, just said it plainly, like handing her a truth she might not want but needed to hear. She opened her mouth, to deny, to explain, maybe to defend, but then she looked at her son. Really looked. Saw the way his lower lip trembled just slightly, saw how his fingers clutched the hem of his shirt like it was the only thing holding him together, and something in her broke open. She didn't say anything, just nodded, tears welling up but not falling. Not yet. Within minutes, 2 police officers arrived, calm, professional, trained in child welfare calls. They spoke gently to the boy, asking simple questions. They talked to the mother separately, giving her space but also making it clear this wasn't optional. They were there to help, not to punish, but they had to follow through. The man who'd made the call stayed nearby, not interfering, just present. When an officer asked for his name, he gave it quietly, then added, "I don't need to be part of this. Just make sure he's okay." He didn't stick around for the aftermath, didn't wait for thanks or questions. Once he saw the boy being wrapped in a gentle blanket by a kind-looking woman from Child Services. He slipped out the door, disappearing into the afternoon light. Back inside, the restaurant slowly returned to normal. Kids went back to their fries. The ice cream machine beeped again. But in that corner booth, everything had shifted. The boy sat curled against his mother, finally letting the tears come, not big sobs, just quiet release. She held him tighter than she had in a long time, whispering, "It's okay. It's going to be okay," even though she wasn't sure yet if it was true. Outside, the city kept moving. Cars honked, buses rumbled. People hurried to places they thought mattered more. But in that ordinary McDonald's on an ordinary Tuesday, something extraordinary had happened. A child had spoken, and someone, just a stranger really, had listened. The days after the McDonald's incident moved slowly, like honey dripping from a spoon. At first, everything felt suspended, like the world was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Back at their small apartment, the boy stayed close to his mother. He didn't ask questions, but he watched her more than usual. How she paused before opening the front door, how she jumped at loud noises, how she sometimes stared out the window like she was looking for something that wasn't there. He didn't understand all of it, but he knew something had changed. And for the first time in a while, it felt like it might be changing for the better. What he'd whispered to the man in the baseball cap hadn't been planned. It wasn't something he'd rehearsed. It had just slipped out like a secret too heavy to keep inside any longer. He'd heard things at night, seen things he wasn't supposed to see. Once he'd found a broken plate under the couch and tried to glue it back together so no one would notice. Another time he'd hidden in his closet with his stuffed rabbit, covering both their ears with a blanket. He didn't know the word afraid the way adults used it, but he knew the feeling in his stomach, the one that made his hands cold and his throat tight. He hadn't told his mother because he thought it was his job to protect her. That's what little kids sometimes believe. If they're quiet enough, good enough, maybe the bad things will stop. But that day at McDonald's, something shifted. Maybe it was the kindness in the stranger's eyes. Maybe it was just exhaustion. Whatever it was, he'd finally let the words out. Meanwhile, across town, the man who dialed 911 couldn't stop thinking about him. He replayed the moment in his head, the boy's voice, the weight of those few words, the way his small body had seemed to shrink into itself right after speaking. He'd been in tough situations before, on sets, in life, even in real emergencies. But this was different. This wasn't about action or drama. It was about trust. A child, barely old enough to tie his shoes, had looked at a stranger and said, "Help." He didn't sleep well that night. The next morning, he called a friend who worked with youth services, not to get involved, just to ask quietly if the boy and his mother were safe. He was told the case was being handled with care, that Child Protective Services had done a home visit, and that both were now under a support plan. No arrests, no headlines, just quiet intervention. That was enough for him. He didn't need to be part of the story. He just needed to know the boy was okay. Back at the apartment, a social worker came by, not in a uniform, just a woman with kind eyes and a soft voice. She didn't ask leading questions. She played a simple card game with the boy while talking gently to his mother. She brought brochures, not judgments, offered resources, not accusations. The mother, for the first time in months, let herself cry, not in front of her son, but later, after he was asleep, curled up with his rabbit. She cried for the shame she felt, for the fear she'd carried alone, for the nights she'd told herself, "Tomorrow will be better." Even when she didn't believe it, she hadn't meant for things to get this far. Life had just piled up. Bills, loneliness, a relationship that started with warmth and ended in silence and sharp words. She'd stayed because she thought leaving would be worse for him. Now she wondered if staying had been the real danger all along. The social worker helped her see it wasn't about blame. It was about safety and healing. And the fact that asking for help wasn't weakness, it was the bravest thing someone could do. A few days later, they moved to a temporary shelter, a clean, quiet place with other families going through their own storms. The boy got his own bed. There was a playground out back. Meals were provided. Most importantly, no one yelled at night. He started drawing again. Big, bright pictures of clouds, rockets, and a tall man with a baseball cap. He didn't say who it was. He just taped the drawing to the wall above his bed. At the same time, news of the McDonald's incident began to leak. Not from the man, but from a diner who'd been there. A blurry photo surfaced online. A man kneeling, a small child beside him, police cars in the background. Rumors spread fast. "Keanu Reeves saves kid?" One headline read. Comments poured in, some praising him, others doubting the story, a few turning it into wild conspiracy theories. But the man ignored it all. He turned off his phone notifications, gave a short, quiet statement to his team. "I just listened." That's all. He didn't want attention. He didn't want praise. He wanted the focus to stay where it belonged, on the boy and his mother, not on him. What no one saw was the quiet phone call he made later that week, to a nonprofit that supported families escaping unsafe homes. He didn't give an interview, didn't ask for recognition, just made a donation large enough to cover rent, counseling, and groceries for several families for months. The organization knew who it was from, but they honored his request. No names, no press. Back at the shelter, the mother started meeting with a counselor. Not because she was forced to, but because for the first time she felt like someone was on her side. She learned about boundaries, about self-worth, about how love shouldn't hurt. She also learned that her son had been carrying more than she realized, and that his whisper at McDonald's wasn't just a cry for help. It was an act of courage. One evening, as they sat on a bench outside watching fireflies blink in the dusk, she asked him softly, "Why did you tell that man what you did?" He thought for a long time, swinging his legs. Then he said, "Because he looked like he wouldn't break." She didn't understand at first, but later she realized what he meant. In a world that often felt fragile, that man had seemed steady, solid, like someone who could hold a secret without dropping it. Weeks passed. The boy started smiling more. He made a friend at the shelter, a girl who loved dinosaurs as much as he loved rabbits. They built forts out of couch cushions and pretended they were explorers on a quiet planet where everyone was kind. His mother began looking for work, not just any job, but something that could give them stability. She enrolled in a training program. For the first time in years, she made plans that stretched beyond tomorrow. And though no one was watching, no cameras rolling, no headlines shouting, it was in these small, ordinary moments that real change was happening, not with fanfare, not with drama, but with a whispered sentence in a fast food restaurant, and the ripple it sent through two lives. The man in the baseball cap never saw them again. But sometimes when he passed a playground or saw a child holding a stuffed animal, he'd pause just for a second and hope they were okay. Because in the end, that's all he'd ever wanted. The truth rarely arrives with sirens or flashing lights. Most of the time it seeps in quietly, through a crack in a story, a hesitation in someone's voice, or the way a child flinches at a slammed door. In the weeks after the McDonald's incident, that's exactly how the full picture began to unfold. Child Protective Services didn't rush to conclusions. They didn't barge in with accusations. Instead, they came with patience, notebooks, and questions asked in calm tones. They spoke with the boy, not in an interrogation room, but on a rug in the shelter's play area, while he built a tower out of blocks. They listened to his mother not as a suspect, but as someone who'd been trying to hold everything together with fraying thread. What they found wasn't violence in the way movies show it. No black eyes, no broken bones. But there were signs, subtle and serious. Missed school days, a home that felt tense even when no one was speaking, a pattern of control that had tightened like a noose over time. The boy had heard things, late-night arguments that turned sharp, promises followed by silence, the kind of quiet that feels heavier than shouting. He'd learned to read moods like weather forecasts, always bracing for the storm. His mother hadn't seen it as abuse. She'd called it just how things are. She'd told herself it wasn't that bad, that she could fix it, that leaving would make things worse for her child. But now, with space and support, she began to see it differently. Not as failure, but as survival. And that survival didn't have to mean staying. The man who'd made the 911 call never asked for updates. But out of respect, and because the case involved a public figure even indirectly, the lead social worker sent a brief confidential note through a trusted channel. Both are safe. Receiving support. Healing has begun. That was enough. Still, the encounter stayed with him. He'd spent years playing heroes on screen, characters who saved the world with guns, speed, or sheer will. But this was different. There were no explosions, no slow-motion leaps, just a child whispering something true, and an adult choosing to believe him. That, he realized, was its own kind of bravery. He started paying more attention, not in a dramatic way, but in the small moments. At a coffee shop, he noticed a teenager flinch when someone raised their voice. At a park, he saw a little girl watching her parents argue with eyes too old for her face. He didn't intervene, he wasn't there to play savior. But he made a mental note to support organizations that were. He began quietly funding training for teachers and bus drivers on how to spot signs of distress in kids. Not because he wanted credit, but because he now understood. Sometimes help starts with someone simply noticing. Back at the shelter, life settled into a new rhythm. The boy started attending a nearby preschool part-time. His teacher later said he was quiet at first, but observant. Always the first to offer a crayon to someone who dropped theirs. The one who checked if a classmate was okay after a fall. He didn't talk about what happened at his old home. But in his drawings, the dark scribbles slowly gave way to suns, trees, and houses with wide-open doors. His mother, meanwhile, began meeting weekly with a counselor who specialized in trauma recovery. She learned that fear could live in the body long after the danger was gone, that her racing heart when a car backfired, or her urge to apologize for small things, weren't weakness. They were echoes, and echoes could fade, with time and care. One afternoon, while folding laundry in their small room at the shelter, she found a note tucked into the boy's jacket pocket. It wasn't written in words, he couldn't write yet, but it was a drawing. A stick figure boy holding hands with a tall man in a baseball cap. Above them, a wobbly heart. Below, a son with a big smile. She didn't cry, not then, but she pressed the paper to her chest and whispered, "Thank you." To no one in particular, maybe to the universe. Maybe to the stranger who'd knelt down when it mattered most. Meanwhile, the story had started to ripple outward, though not in the way viral internet moments usually do. A local news outlet ran a short, respectful piece. No names, no photos, about how a child's quiet words led to a family getting the help they needed. It ended with a hotline number and a simple message. If you see something, say something. You might be the only one who notices. Teachers shared it in staff meetings. Nurses pinned it to bulletin boards. A librarian read a version of it, changed just enough to protect privacy, to a group of kindergartners during story hour, framing it as a lesson in kindness and listening. And then, something unexpected happened. People started sharing their own stories. Not online for likes, but in hushed conversations over coffee, in support group circles, in letters to counselors. A woman remembered how her third-grade teacher noticed her flinching when the bell rang too loud, and quietly connected her family with help. A man recalled being the kid who whispered to a bus driver, "My dad's really mad again," and how that driver made a call that changed everything. It turned out the boy at McDonald's wasn't alone. He was just the latest in a long line of children who'd found the courage to speak, and adults who chose to listen. The man in the baseball cap heard about some of these stories secondhand. He didn't feel like a hero. If anything, he felt humbled. Because what he'd done, kneeling down, dialing 911, wasn't extraordinary. It was human. And the real work, the hard and beautiful work of healing, was being done by people far less visible. Social workers, counselors, shelter staff, neighbors who brought groceries, teachers who paid attention. One evening, he visited a youth center in East LA, not as a celebrity but as a volunteer helping serve dinner. He didn't give a speech, didn't pose for photos. He just handed out plates of pasta, asked kids how their day was, and listened when they answered. Afterward, as he walked to his car, a staff member stopped him. "You know," she said gently, "you didn't just help that one boy. You reminded a lot of people that they matter, that their voice matters even if they're small." He nodded, hands in his pockets. "I just hope he knows he's not alone." "He does," she said. "And so do a lot of others now, too." Back at the shelter, the boy was asleep, rabbit tucked under his arm. Outside his window, the city hummed, cars, distant music, the occasional laugh. It wasn't perfect. Healing never is, but for the first time in a long time it was quiet in the right way, the kind of quiet that lets you breathe. And somewhere in another corner of the city, another child might be gathering the courage to whisper something true. All they'd need is someone willing to kneel down and listen. Months had passed since that afternoon at McDonald's, and life had settled into something quieter, steadier. The boy was in kindergarten now, his backpack covered in dinosaur stickers, his lunchbox always holding a note from his mother. Sometimes a heart, sometimes a silly joke, always a reminder, "I'm proud of you." He still carried his stuffed rabbit everywhere, but he didn't hide it under his shirt anymore. He held it proudly, like a friend who'd been through storms with him. At school, he'd made a best friend, a girl who loved space and insisted the moon was made of cheese. They spent recess building rocket ships out of cardboard boxes and arguing over whether aliens would prefer ketchup or mustard. His mother had found a small apartment in a neighborhood with wide sidewalks and a library within walking distance. It wasn't fancy, but it was theirs. The walls were bare at first, but slowly filled, with drawings, a second-hand bookshelf, a plant she kept forgetting to water but kept trying to save anyway. She'd started a part-time job at a community center, helping organize after-school programs. It didn't pay much, but it gave her purpose, and for the first time in years she woke up without that knot in her stomach. She still thought about that day, the whisper, the stranger's pale face, the police arriving, but not with shame anymore. With gratitude. Not because someone saved them, but because someone saw them. Really saw them. And that made all the difference. Meanwhile, the man who'd dialed 911 had returned to his usual routine, working, traveling, keeping mostly to himself. But something had shifted beneath the surface. He'd always been kind, but now his kindness had direction. He began visiting youth shelters not for photo ops, but to sit and listen. He'd bring books, not cameras, ask questions, not give speeches. Once he spent an entire afternoon helping a group of teens fix bikes. His hands greasy, his cap pulled low, just another volunteer. He also started quietly supporting a local nonprofit that trained frontline workers, cashiers, bus drivers, school, aides on how to recognize signs of distress in children. The program wasn't flashy. It didn't make headlines. But it taught people to notice the kid who flinches at loud noises, the one who never has lunch, the one who always wears long sleeves in summer. And more importantly, it taught them what to do next. Not to pry, not to assume, but to report, to connect, to care without overstepping. One of the first people to sign up for the training, a McDonald's employee from the downtown location, the same one who'd been working the register that Tuesday afternoon. She remembered the boy's quiet steps, the way the man had knelt like it was the most natural thing in the world. She'd always thought of her job as just serving food. Now she saw it differently. "You never know who's walking through that door carrying something heavy," she told her coworkers. Sometimes just saying, "You okay?" can be the lifeline. That idea began to spread, not through viral videos, but through everyday actions. A librarian noticed a child reading the same book over and over, always alone, and gently asked if everything was all right at home. A bus driver saw a teenager, crying silently, and pulled over to offer a tissue and a quiet, "Want to talk?" A neighbor started leaving extra groceries on a struggling family's porch with a simple note, "Hope this helps." No need to return. None of it was dramatic. None of it made the news. But together these small acts wove a safety net, one thread at a time. Back at the community center, the boy's mother sat in on a parenting workshop. She wasn't there because she had to be, but because she wanted to learn how to build a home where her child never had to whisper his fears to strangers. She learned about emotional safety, about how to talk about big feelings, about the power of saying, "It's okay to not be okay." After the session, she stayed behind to thank the facilitator. "You know," the facilitator said softly, "your son's courage didn't just help your family, it sparked something bigger." The mother smiled faintly. He didn't know that. He just needed someone to hear him. "Sometimes," the facilitator replied, "that's enough to change everything." One evening, as the boy colored at the kitchen table, he asked, "Do you think the man with the hat remembers me?" His mother paused, stirring soup on the stove. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I think he hopes you're happy." The boy nodded, then went back to his drawing. A tall figure with a baseball cap standing under a rainbow, holding a rabbit in one hand and a sunflower in the other. He didn't send the drawing anywhere. He just taped it to the fridge next to a grocery list and a library due date reminder. It belonged there, in the ordinary mess of their new life. Across town, the man sat on his porch at dusk, sipping tea. His phone buzzed, a message from the nonprofit he supported. They were expanding the training program to 3 more cities. Enrollment was full within hours. "People want to help," the message read. "They just needed to know how." He smiled, set the phone down, and watched the sky turn pink. He didn't need thanks, didn't need recognition. What mattered was that the boy was safe, that his mother was healing, that others, inspired by a quiet moment in a fast food restaurant, were choosing to pay attention. Because real change doesn't roar. It whispers. And if enough people lean in to listen, it grows louder, until it becomes a chorus of care, echoing through schools, stores, buses, and homes. The boy didn't know any of this. He just knew that tonight, his mom was making his favorite, mac and cheese, and that tomorrow he and his friend were going to build the biggest rocket ship yet. And in that simple, ordinary joy, there was everything. A year had passed since that quiet Tuesday at McDonald's, and the world had kept turning. Cars still honked, coffee still got cold, and kids still argued over who got the last chicken nugget. But in one small corner of the city, everything had changed. The boy was in 1st grade now. He'd lost a front tooth, learned to tie his shoes, and declared himself an expert on both dinosaurs and cloud shapes. He still carried his rabbit everywhere, though one ear was now slightly chewed from nervous nibbling during thunderstorms. His teacher said he was thoughtful, always the first to notice if someone was sitting alone at lunch, always quick to share his crayons. He didn't talk about the past much, but when he did, it wasn't with fear. Just facts, like telling someone what he'd had for breakfast. "We used to live somewhere loud," he'd say. "Now it's quiet."
I like quiet. His mother had finished her training program and now worked full-time at the community center, helping other parents navigate housing, counseling, and school enrollment.
She'd even started leading a weekly support circle, just a few chairs in a room, hot tea and honest talk. No judgments, no fixes, just space to breathe. She still had hard days, days when a certain tone of voice made her tense up, days when guilt whispered in her ear. But now she had tools, and friends, and a son who hugged her extra tight on those days. As if he knew, one afternoon, a journalist reached out, not with cameras or demands, but with a simple request. They'd heard a version of the story through a shelter worker, and wanted to write something respectful, something that honored the boy's courage without exposing him. They asked for permission. The mother thought about it for a long time. Then she said yes, but only if the focus stayed on the child's voice, not the celebrity who'd listened. The article ran in a local paper a few weeks later. No names, no photos. Just a gentle telling of how a 5-year-old's whisper led to help, healing, and a quiet reminder that children often say exactly what they mean, if we're willing to hear it. At the end, it listed resources, hotlines, shelters, training programs for bystanders. It didn't go viral, but it was passed hand to hand at schools, pinned to bulletin boards at laundromats, read aloud in community meetings. People responded, not with outrage, but with reflection. A high school student wrote a poem about the power of small voices. A retired teacher started volunteering at a youth center. A grocery store manager held a staff meeting about noticing signs of distress in customers. None of it was grand, but it was real. The man who'd made the 911 call read the article once, then folded it carefully and put it in a drawer. He didn't comment, didn't post about it, but a week later he quietly doubled his support for the bystander training program. He also began visiting elementary schools, not as a star, but as a guest reader. He'd sit cross-legged on the floor, book in hand, and read stories about kindness, bravery, and listening. Afterward, kids would ask him questions. "Do you have a dog? What's your favorite ice cream?" Never about fame, just ordinary curiosity, and he loved it. One morning, as he walked through a neighborhood park, he saw a small boy whispering something to his friend under a tree. The friend nodded seriously, then patted the boy's shoulder. The man smiled and kept walking. He didn't need to know what was said. He just hoped someone was listening. Back at the apartment, the boy's mother finally wrote a letter. Not to send, but to heal. She sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, sunlight streaming through the window, and wrote everything she'd wanted to say. Thank you for kneeling down. Thank you for believing him. Thank you for not looking away. She didn't mail it. She folded it, tucked it into a book, and let it live there, a quiet monument to a moment that changed everything. The boy, meanwhile, had started drawing again. Bigger pictures now, filled with color. One showed a tall man with a baseball cap holding an umbrella over a small figure in the rain. Another showed a house with open windows, a garden, and two people holding hands under a sun that smiled. He didn't label them. He didn't need to. Time softened the edges of the past. The fear didn't vanish overnight, but it lost its grip. Laughter returned, real, unguarded laughter during board games, silly dances in the kitchen, bedtime stories read in funny voices. The boy began sleeping through the night. His mother stopped checking the locks 3 times before bed. One evening, as they walked home from the library, the boy looked up and said, "I think I'm happy now." His mother stopped, knelt, and looked him in the eyes. "Me too," she said. "And it's okay if some days are harder. We'll get through them together." He nodded, took her hand, and they kept walking. Across town, the man sat on a bench outside a youth center, watching kids play basketball. A staff member approached and handed him a small envelope. "From a family you helped," she said gently. "They asked me to give it to you. No name, just this." Inside was a drawing. A boy, a rabbit, a man in a baseball cap, and a big red heart. On the back, in careful printing, "Thank you for listening." He held it for a long time. Then he slipped it into his jacket pocket, stood up, and went inside to help serve dinner. He never called himself a hero. He knew better. Heroes were the counselors who worked late, the teachers who noticed the quiet kids, the neighbors who brought soup without being asked, the children who found the courage to speak when no one else would. His part had been small, just a few seconds of attention, one phone call. But sometimes that's all it takes to tip the scale. The story didn't end with a parade or a movie deal. It ended the way real healing does, with ordinary days, shared meals, bedtime stories, and the quiet certainty that you're not alone. And in a world that often shouts for attention, the most powerful thing anyone can do is still this: kneel down, look someone in the eye, and truly listen, because sometimes the smallest voice carries the biggest truth.